Alright friends, Zig starting off the interview. Today on the show we have Richard Lloyd from Television. He's an early pioneer in the CBGB punk scene. He's played in a vast amount of projects and has a successful solo career. Richard has a book out called Everything is Combustible. It's an autobio set up in a memoir sitch, so it's not super chronological, but it reads as stories being shared. And it's really engaging in that way. It's really easy to engage with these stories and follow this chain of his career, but also jumps back and forth. And the stories are ridiculous. Richard hung out with Jimi Hendrix and John Lee Hooker and Buddy Guy and all these guitar gurus, which he then later became. So in our chat, we kind of bounce in between all this stuff I read out of his book and him elaborating on some of it. Some of it may not make sense. There's certain stories that you may have to read, and I thought he would elaborate a little bit more on it, but it didn't. So, more reason to check out his book. But it was a complete honor to chat with Richard. So many of these interviews, if you guys have been following, like with Glenn Morrow, Dave Thomas, Chris Butler, Don Ralph, all these guys worked with Richard. So it was really cool to kind of hear the outside perspective and then get the chat with him. Before we get to the interview, this podcast is mixed by Studio 44, Studio 44 Cleveland. You can reach out to Studio 44 by studio44cleveland@gmail.com or Studio 44 Cleveland on Facebook. And you can have Jay Sparrow for any of your audio needs. If it's streaming, video, or recording, or if you need a guy to be every other member of your band, Jay can make it happen. Studio 44 made this podcast sound listenable. They'll make yours sound listenable. Studio 44. And if you guys can rate, review, subscribe, and follow the podcast on all the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to awesome guests to share their insights with you. It'd be much appreciated. So without further ado, here's my chat with Richard Lloyd. Well, then we'll jump right into it. So you started with drums. Or no, you started with piano, right?
Well, it was a junior piano, not a full-scale piano. But I used to play one note and just listen to it fade and think to myself, as long as it continues to fade, it's in existence, it's got to be permanent, which was an interesting concept at the time.
So it resonates out and doesn't stop. It exists somewhere else as a smaller frequency, you think?
Well, in volume, it never really stops moving.
Oh, whoa.
Everything is vibrating all the time anyway.
Right.
So, but that only lasted when I was 4 or 5, 3, 4, and 5. And by then, I stopped using it. It broke.
Yeah. Now, is that the thought you had when you're 4 and 5, thinking those notes ringing out? Because in your book, you get as a kid, you have some deep thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I had deep thoughts from the beginning. I mean, I looked up and I didn't understand adults, and I can remember, before I could talk, asking myself, how come I understand what they're saying? I mean, there's a word here or there that I wouldn't know, but mostly it came ready-made, which was pretty strange.
Right. So it was almost like knowing everything that was going on as opposed to trying to figure it out.
Well, it was also how do I know this? How do I know something without knowing it, without learning it?
Right.
But your brain is so young and it's malleable, and I guess it just happens from the surroundings that you get shaped.
Yeah. Yeah, you have all these extra neurons and you prune them off for what you need as a typical brain development. It's interesting that you came double ready to handle your environment.
Yeah. Right.
Was it now I read that you had synesthesia. Did that resonate with
Synesthesia?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. I still have a touch of it. But I mean, where musical notes have color tone to them.
Right. Did you see that with the
Yeah.
piano when you were young?
I can't remember.
Because like I read that you saw drums with colors. Because drums was like the next instrument, right, after piano.
Right, that's right. And drums had color too. So one day, then they just drained out, and all the color drained away, and it was cardboard and dry and tone deaf. That was weird.
That is weird. But that was it. That was then you moved on to the guitar, right?
That's when I moved on to the guitar. You know, my cousins had a guitar. Between them, there were two cousins, two brothers, and they had a guitar and were going to start a rockabilly band. This is back in the late 50s, and I was really jealous of that. So one night we had a sleepover, and we passed the guitar around. I mean, I couldn't play anything. They showed me like three chords, C, G, and D. And as they drifted off to sleep, I had the guitar, and I took it into the bathroom so I wouldn't disturb them. It was acoustic.
Oh, okay. So it's
And the
fairly
next thing I know, they're knocking on the door. It's the morning.
loud.
And I'd spent the whole night playing those three chords in the bathroom.
Did you get them?
So I guess I was desperate to be a guitar player.
Did you get them down? A whole night of strumming?
Yeah, that's what happened.
That's awesome.
I would have to move my left hand fingers with my right hand sometimes
To get them in the right spot, to get them
to
anchored
get them in
there.
the right spot.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, especially with chords. Chords are hard to learn at first. You know, there's a specific arrangement of fingers, and you got to shift it to another in a split second. You know, like that muscle memory takes, especially when you first start. I remember doing that, switching from the D chord and trying to get it to the A. You know, like when you're using the three fingers for A at first, and you're like, that's that's you. In your book, you have an interesting habit of getting really, like, at least in your younger years, getting really into a thing and becoming fairly good at it and then leaving. Like I noticed
And
that
leave
with
it? Did you say leave it?
leaving.
There's a lot of areas in the world worthy of study.
True.
I want to know everything. Of course, that's impossible because you have a limited lifespan and a limited intake of impressions. You know,
Right.
So you can't know everything, but you can know how to know and learn how to learn, and then you can learn anything.
I think that's well said. Because however you pick something up, music's a really good example of a practice of learning a vast amount of things to fit one vague thing. So,
What? Say that again?
I said, sorry, learning music because there's so much into it, right? Like, and there's so many different factors. In the skill set of learning, like taking apart a song and learning how it works, you can build that to do whatever, like whatever music you want to do. And so it's like you have this dedicated process to tear something apart and see how it works, and you can build it in any way you want. So it's like a vague, you can do what you want with it. But that skill set of learning and tearing something apart and seeing how all the mechanics work pays off vastly in the field of music, and that could be adapted to a lot of different fields in life.
I see what you're saying, and I agree with you.
Oh, thanks.
You get the ABCs of something. You know, you can form words and sentences and paragraphs with enough practice.
So when you moved to, or no, when you met Velvet, when is that when, like, at that point guitar was really the thing, right?
Absolutely.
And in the book you tell the story about how he was saying he knew Jimi Hendrix and everyone else was like, no way, and he did. And like the phone's being passed around and you heard his voice on the phone. That had to be like
Right.
bonkers. Like the guy I just heard on these records forever is on this speaker reacting to me.
No, it wasn't quite like that, but
No?
no. I mean, I'm not a person who goes into awe at another human being. I don't have many. I mean, I can see heroism
Right.
in what people do, but I'm not uh, starstruck by it. Although in Hendrix's case, there was something to be said that he was from another planet,
Yeah.
for real, or another reality.
Because you've had a lot of interactions with him. Was like talking with him like when like it's interesting with Hendrix interviews. Like sometimes he like says this thing that makes complete sense, and then it seems like he's talking around a thing, and you gotta know the lingo to understand what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
he had a certain lingo going, that's for sure. And blah blah woof woof.
That's pretty amazing. Like just through like Velvet, like to get this secondhand knowledge and like to say that's like not too many. A lot of people quote learning from Hendrix, learning from the records, but to kind of get like a secondhand source. That's pretty
Oh yeah,
incredible.
yeah. It was a special time in my life, that's for sure. Being a young, I mean, I was a teenager.
Right.
To be around those kind of people was, awesome.
Now, when you came out with a Hendrix covers record years later. How much of those lessons panned out, or maybe made more sense when you put them in the context of like playing Hendrix's stuff?
Like, sure, yeah, I mean, some of the things that Jimmy used to do were invaluable. I mean, especially his vertical knowledge. That is to say, his knowledge up and down the fretboard rather than across it.
Right.
Quite spectacular.
Now you have an interesting like a um, with like Eastern culture and like meditation and yoga and breathing exercises. Um,
Right.
have you ever dove into Eastern music?
Very little, as a matter of fact. I listened to a lot of Indian music at a certain point in my life. Sitar music,
Yeah.
mostly. Uh, I have a sitar, but I don't hardly play it. It's large and unwieldy.
It's hard, and like the reason
It's
I brought
very hard.
the reason I was going to ask is that whole thing's vertical. You pretty much are
That's right.
rocking one string, but you're playing the scale like you really got to stretch your arm out, and you're moving up and down this giant guitar almost, but like it's all vertical.
Exactly.
And
Very profound instrument.
right, I was always blown away like once I really saw you were kind of playing one string and the rest kind of support. It looks so intimidating because there's like 20
Uh,
some strings going up the neck, but you're really only playing one.
that's right.
So with
One
the
time. Unless you're playing chords or
right,
intervals.
well, yeah, because they got the two you can kind of. I got a really crappy one that I got off the internet. It's kind of like a Squire. It's got like a flat body. It doesn't got a whole gourd, right? And it's just like a
Uh,
a flat sitar.
like a guitar sitar.
Kind of. It's like It's like an actual sitar. Like it's like the neck with the carved out, hollowed thing with
Uh,
and the movable frets. But
right.
but the
Yeah, yeah.
body of it is like like an electric guitar almost, where it's like almost a solid piece of wood. So it goes from
Uh,
this solid piece into this like sitar neck. And
right. Is it that plug in?
yeah, you can plug it in. The pickup's awful, but you can plug it in.
You could replace the pickup, that's for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to move that bridge.
No, that I understand.
But it's interesting, like the approach to singing or phrasing music vertically like that. And Hendrix did it in such a profound way with like how he phrased things, and like it's almost singing in a way.
Right. Yeah, he had a very expressive voice on the instrument, much like a Coltrane uh, thought patterns, you know?
Right. Did you ever run into? I mean, you ever see Coltrane?
I haven't.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get the chance. I didn't follow. I listened to jazz at one point in my life quite a bit. My stepfather was into it, but and he was into stuff like Brubeck and Time Out, stuff like that. But and I listened to records, but I really never went to see much jazz. I mean, I was always into rock and roll.
The Brubeck thing kind of takes from all these different cultures as well and puts that odd time signature stuff in it. As a drummer, did you dive into that?
Oh, sure. Well, I took lessons
Right.
for 3 years, and we studied time signatures. They're all easily. It's. I was good in math, so it was very easy for me that way. Like 5/4 is really a waltz with an extra half measure.
Yeah.
So you can figure these things out pretty easily by subdivision.
Right. It's interesting like how that feel really shifts though when you're not as like a clear cut like able to like visualize it like that. Like that feel that one extra hit can really throw someone off, right?
Oh yeah.
Because everyone's so in that 4/4 groove, you know. You had that like 7/8 time. You're what?
Well, 7/8 time is a regular 4/4 plus a waltz on the end.
Right. But that's a
Well,
beautiful way to dissect it and tear it apart.
well, that's the way I was taught. Yeah,
Yeah. The one string thing kind of came in with your experience with Johnny Lee Hooker, right?
that's right. It was the same advice that to play one string up and down, and yeah. But John Lee actually told me to take all the strings off, but one. So that was a little more, you know. I'm sure that John Lee Hooker and a lot of these guys I know would do things like in the middle of the night they'd take one as a wire snip and snip a piano wire
Yeah.
because each key, each note on a piano has 3 or 4 strings to it.
Right.
So you would snip one and then take it and nail it to the side of a barn or whatever piece of wood and use a slide on it or your fingers so that you began with one string. And that's what he was advising me to do. Then to work with 2 strings and then 3. I still use that thought process to parse out what I'm going to be playing.
Yeah. How so? Like,
Well, I forget what I just said, so
like you use that process, that thought process of building off one string, right? Like, is that
yeah.
phrase wise or like song wise? Do you start like that?
No, it just depends on if you can see the intervals. Like there's only 2 types of thirds,
Right.
a major third and a minor third. And this gets pretty technical because you can't have a flatted third because you'd run in. I mean, you can't go further than a flatted third because that would be the 2,
Right.
and you can't go above it because that would be the 4.
Right.
So in terms of the written music and discussions of music, those are the limits, major or minor.
Right.
And then you just stack them like major on top of a minor on top of a major on top of a minor is mixolydian. It's a flattened seventh chord.
You have an interesting way of thinking of music theory. You call it a chemical way, an alchemical way.
Alchemical?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And is it like ratios that make sense with that? I found that really interesting.
absolutely. Ratio is, the basic structure. It's like the atomic structure is in built-in ratio. The lower the ratio, the more pleasant the sound,
Right.
and the more dissonant you get. It's just weird ratios.
So it's off. It's not even in the sense of it mathematically, and it makes that dissonant sound. Like a tritone would probably have a fairly dissonant ratio. Then, yeah.
That's right. It has the worst ratio of any interval on a guitar
Right.
or a piano or anything.
That's fascinating.
However, it drives the music because it's so discordant that you've got to move from it and have a resolution.
Right.
And the resolution is to the fourth of whatever you were playing. So I don't know how much of your audience is going to be able to follow any of this.
It's a fairly musical audience.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
So Joey Ramone was kind of only on level 2 then, right?
Joey?
Yeah, you told me, or not you told me. I read it in your book.
Yeah.
I've been,
Yeah.
On a side thought.
He had a guitar with like one string on it. Or no, it was two strings.
Right.
And I said, where are the rest? I'll help you put them on. He says, those are the only two I can play, Richie. I can't play six. Same notion.
Right.
So he wrote his songs on two strings.
What a fascinating character, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Joey. Joey was a good guy.
But he'd be on level 2 of John Lee Hooker's one string course.
Correct.
I was gonna say your book. I just got finished reading your book, and you write it in such a way that it sounds. And I've listened to a few interviews post reading it or during the midst of reading it, and you got a way of writing that sounds like you do a very good way of conveying how you speak with your book. Like after listening to some interviews, it's like this is how Richard talks.
Well, I used a voice recognition software to write the book. So I didn't actually type.
Oh, cool.
I actually spoke the book. I just told stories and it would type for me.
That's awesome.
Occasionally it would make a mistake.
Right.
So you had to correct it here and there. But towards the end, it got very, very good at determining what you were saying and typing it correctly. Like blue, meaning the wind blew, the
Right.
color blue. It actually could differentiate that after a while.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna blue. You can be written right, but it can in the context be wrong. That's cool. Did that help with the process of compiling these stories, verbally sharing them?
Well, sure. The verbal stories are so much easier than written stories because when you write, you're removed to at least one more level from communication.
Right.
Because you still have to think in words.
Yeah.
In order to write something down and pass it to another person.
As in, I don't know, maybe there's verbalisms we all have in communicating that when you write it out, you don't write that, or when you write it out, maybe it doesn't come across the same.
Yeah, well, the syntax is the difference. The rhythm is different because you're
Right.
breaking up your speech because nobody can, well, very few people can type as fast as they talk.
Yeah, for sure.
There are people who do that though, and I wish I were one of them, but I'm not. I remember they taught typing in high school one
Yeah.
semester, and I thought it was a worthless class. The typewriters were going out, and then the computer comes. Now you've got to learn to type. It's to communicate at all, practically, unless you're actually with somebody.
Right. No, it's definitely. When I was in high school, we had the same thing, where they put like these like little like blockers over your hands, so you couldn't see. You know, you're supposed to like learn where the keys are. I was awful at it.
Well, like feel,
Yeah, yeah, you're supposed to learn it by feel, know where like T and G and F is. You know,
yeah, that's fun.
it was all right. I was no good at it. I'm a one finger typer.
Uh huh. Well, I'm like a two or three finger typer, but
That's pretty
I,
good.
I hate typing. I still do.
Same.
Well, let's say it's distasteful to me. I don't hate it. That would be a waste of good energy.
Sure. Good point. Um, Peter Loffinger. Now I've been talking to a few guys from the Cleveland scene. Like I just talked to Dave Thomas and Adele Bertay, and
Uh huh.
she just put out this book about Peter Loffinger. And you guys had
Well,
it, Loeffner. You guys had a fairly interesting relationship.
I hardly knew him except for the time we television went to Cleveland and played a show. I didn't really know him. He really was, I guess, besotted with
Yeah.
Tom.
And he had a pretty, according to Adele's book, interesting relationship with Richard Hell.
He did?
Yeah, apparently he would call him all the time, and like he like idolized Richard, and like,
Oh, yeah.
and I guess Richard would kind of be like, "You got a way to go, kid," and like he'd get all upset about it. And like, there's a story in her book about him being all distraught from getting in a screaming match over the phone, and like he was also writing the Voidoids up and stuff. And like shooting a gun in an apartment or some crazy thing. It's a pretty wild book. Leaving New York, and the first stop was Cleveland, right?
The first time television played out of New York City was, yes, Cleveland.
What was that? How dramatic of a shift was it from New York to the Cleveland scene?
It was pretty good
Yeah,
transition, actually. There were a lot of people that came to the show, and it was a success.
was that for first out of town gig? That's a tough one to pull off. Usually, you play the nobody, you meet the other bands, and they set you up for the next time around.
Right.
Um, so that was with Rocket from the Tombs, which you eventually produced and played with.
Correct. That is correct. Peter Lautner died very early, uh, from his alcoholism and just, I guess, his pancreas and couldn't take it,
Yeah.
and liver. It's a shame. Shame to die of alcoholism. It's really a shitty way to go.
But on with the shifted to the positive of the record, what was it like kind of going back and stepping in that scene? Because when you wrote about the guys in the Rocket from the Tomb guys in the book, there's like this chaotic kind of mess of people yelling at each other and fighting before the show, and one guy's tripping. What was it like years later to come back and basically kind of produce and manage that?
Well, it was exactly that. I mean, they were still arguing. And I went to Los Angeles to rehearse with them, and like within 5 minutes of being on stage, Cheetah Chrome walked off stage, and David was sitting with his head in his hands. And I mean, it was just a bad scene. I thought the band was going to break up before we ever played one show. And that band just continuously argued.
But somehow you guys pulled it off.
Somehow we pulled it off for a while. A brief. I mean, Rocket from the Tombs, technically, I guess David Thomas owns the name because he puts out Rocket from the Tombs records with nobody from the Rocket from the Tombs except him.
Mm.
And maybe Craig Bell.
Okay.
The bass player. But other than that, it's just his show.
Now, what was it like working with John Doe?
Well, John's a great guy. He was very frustrated with the record company and that Geffen. And they had made him, I didn't know this at the time. I got a call from a guy named Gary Gersh, who is the A&R man, and he asked me if I was willing to go play with John because he needed some street credibility. And so I went, joined their band, John's band.
Yeah.
And that was terrific. John was great. Have you heard Meet John Doe, that record?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, it's a good record.
Was it how much of a shift was it to fit his style? Like as far as like it had more of the kind of country thing?
It was kind of easy for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, no, he's one of those guys that's road dogging it still, like, well, until the pandemic, but like X, when they got back together, they would come they do a tour like every year.
Uh-huh.
Like, those guys hustle.
That's funny.
Yeah,
I suppose I don't hustle enough.
Say what?
I suppose I just don't hustle enough.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's like a balance to it, right? Like, you can only put it, take in and put out as much as you take in.
Yeah.
Do you get that itch now? Do you get that itch to go play now that we're all kind of like set in place?
Yeah, it's been a weird year off, and I'm looking forward to getting back to normal, or whatever normal is going to look like, because it certainly won't be the same. But I'm just hoping that we can. I got one shot, and I'm supposed to get another later this month to be vaccinated, and so I will feel pretty safe then. But how do you get an audience to come out and see you when there's this much, fear and trepidation? Although, I guess if you're a spring breaker, you don't care.
Right. It's fascinating who really feels like affected by it, and how each state is kind of like handled it in a unique way. Like Ohio, like I don't know how Tennessee is. I know PA is pretty shut down, and like Ohio's like kind of middle. Like there's some stuff that's open.
Really?
Yeah, some stuff's open, some stuff's not, and like there's guidelines, but they're you know what I mean, it's very like middle of like you can go here, but you got to put that on and sit over there.
Are you in Ohio?
Yeah.
What part?
I'm like 20 minutes outside Cleveland.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I was so interested about Peter and your time with Rocket in the Tombs, because like that's like local legend.
But by the time by the time I joined them, everybody was living in a different city.
Right.
So it was weird how we would have to pick a spot that was in the center of where we were dispersed in order to get ready and rehearse for a tour.
Yeah, because I think Dave Thomas was he in the UK at that point?
Yeah, he was living in Bristol,
Okay, so yeah, to get
in
hold of that guy would be
Britain.
hard. Gotcha.
But his mother had a farm, or
Oh,
has a farm in Pennsylvania, and he would use that as his base of operations.
gotcha.
I had never been there, but that's where came from when he was over here. He wouldn't go back and forth from England that much.
Right. Well, rightly so. It's not easy. Not easy trek. Okay.
No, it isn't.
What can you tell me
For
about
now.
Albert Anderson?
Albert Anderson was one of my best friends at a certain period of time when I was like 17, 18. Another guitar player, um, and he went on to play with Bob Marley and the Wailers, and he still does that. I mean, Bob is gone. Well, most of those guys are gone, but reggae lives on. And Albert's like the only American to have been in Bob's touring band.
That's amazing.
So, pretty amazing. That's right. One of my best friends ended up with Bob Marley and the Wailers.
Were you guys
But,
playing music together at one point, or were you just friends and then he kind of blossomed into guitar
no, we
for?
played together,
Okay.
but usually with one, we would like take a guitar to school and, and sit in the student lounge and pass the guitar back and forth.
Skipping class, or
Different class, you bet. I can't even remember a single classroom episode that year.
yeah, that sounds like a good year.
Yeah, it was a good year for memory loss.
That's it's amazing that like the one he was able to fit in with that crowd and stuck with it, especially with the loss of Bob. Now Bob's music
Uh,
had a profound effect on you later on. Um, there's a story you share in your book about the song African Herbsman and how
yeah,
that chant about the transplanted heart
yeah,
helped.
that helped me at one point. It was like a gift from heaven, that that refrain.
Right. Almost like a mantra.
Almost like a mantra. That's correct. That kept me alive.
That's amazing. When did Kundalini yoga really become a practice?
1990.
90s?
1990. That's right.
That's an intense, like, I've been exposed to a little bit of Kundalini and like those it's complicated and like I had a girlfriend who was practicing it and
Uh
like
huh.
I she would try to explain it and I was like I couldn't keep up. And you kind of like in your book you said you kind of like you're practicing it and you kind of got to the point everyone's trying to get to and had to work your way back down. Like
That's that. Yeah, it took like over a year to become normal again. It was what was it like? I can't
right.
really describe it. It's like having a wordless uh, experience, just impressions flooding the brain, and the eye sense kind of spills out, permeates into wherever you are. Everybody has an atmosphere around them, and in that experience, that atmosphere breaks, and your eye is all over the place. If you said "I," where do you think it comes from? It comes from your chest, or your stomach, or your head?
I don't I don't know. Like I guess that really would matter? Like, some people think it's like the middle of the forehead. I guess it does that chakra run, right?
Correct.
So for you, where was it? Was it the third eye sitch or like,
No, it was vertical,
huh?
entirely vertical,
Wow.
above my head.
Right. Oh, okay. Okay. Now I've seen the chakra things, and they show like there's the one above like the middle of the forehead.
Yeah, well, I wasn't using that kind of map
Right.
exactly, but nor would I explain what I was doing to anybody because it's a very dangerous practice. One can end up psychotic or, in grave need of medical attention.
Right. And how would you explain that? Though, like, what's going on? I'm taking all this
Yeah.
in. You had a you had a really interesting like these breathing exercises in the very beginning of your book as a young child. You explain like how you would just do them naturally. And
Correct.
do you think that's why the Kundalini thing it, like hit so hard? Because you almost had a whole lifetime of practicing these type of exercises.
It could be, that I was primed and ready to go off, as it were. I'm also bipolar A, so I have pretty strenuous mood changes. I'm pretty stable now, but it can be really rough.
And is it like mood changes as in like manic type stuff where you like hyper focus on a thing, or is it like mood changes?
Yeah, I get manic. It usually ends up with me in a hospital.
Mm. Yeah, that definitely is intense. Like, and that is a lot of work to manage it.
Right.
I've talked with Glenn Morrow and Don Ralph.
Oh yeah.
And I talked with Dave Thomas and just all these. Chris Butler was another guy I want to ask you about. He recorded drums on your first record, right? On Alchemy.
No.
Was it second?
No, like my fourth record, I think.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. But Chris is an awesome guy. Anyway,
He's on the cover. Doesn't matter. LP.
oh, okay.
Terrific drummer. Good songwriter too.
Right. He's a hustler too. He's always making some crazy projects.
Right.
All those guys just spoke the world of you, so I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Thanks for your interest.
Of course.
I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, Richard, you have a wonderful rest of the day, and
Okay. Thank you. You too.
thanks. All right, have a good one.
Bye bye.